Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels, and this week we've got a couple of jobs we need to catch up with in the vegetable garden. We're going to be checking habitat for wildlife around the garden, and I'm going to show you how to make sure your secateurs are razor sharp, ready for autumn pruning. One of the things I always do in the vegetable garden on the brassica bed in early summer is cover them over with this fine black net. It's basically to keep off the butterflies, because if the butterflies get on there, the cabbage whites, and lay their eggs, then they get eaten by the caterpillars, and it works fairly well. We get the odd bit of damage where they lay through it. Normally I would take it off, but I've got a problem with pigeons in the garden at the moment, so I'm going to leave these nets on over winter so the pigeons can't come and eat all my winter greens. So if you've got a similar problem, I would advise to leave the covers on, or at least get some covers to be prepared to protect your cabbages, Brussels, cauliflowers and all the winter vegetables. One thing I want to do while the weather's still mild and before the ground gets too wet is to lift the potatoes, because if we leave them in the ground too long, the slugs will get them and they'll ruin them. So it's worth getting them out, drying them off, and that way they'll store much better. I've already cut the tops down on these. These had really vigorous tops on, but I cut them down several weeks ago now because we had blight in the area. So to protect the tubers, I cut them off and got rid of them. But I've been leaving them in the ground until now to dig them. So it's time to find out what is underneath these ridges. Wow. So there we go. Quite a good crop there. It's important when you are lifting your potatoes to make sure you put the fork well down into the soil to avoid spearing them. And that's not bad from one root. I'm just going to dig a bit more because very often we get one or two that go deep, and we don't want to leave them in, because if we do, they'll grow next year, and this will be the bean plot next year. So there we go, we've got a nice crop of potatoes there. What I would do with these now is just leave them on the soil surface so that the sun can dry them off, and then the soil, when it's dry, will rub off. And then to be able to store them, I like to put them either in potato sacks, this is a Hessian sack, or paper sacks, because they breathe. You don't want to put them in polythene. But before we store them, it is really important that we make sure they're nice and dry. But I don't think they're bad. There's some nice baking potatoes there, and they should keep all the way through the winter as long as we keep them frost-free and dry. I think it's fair to say that most gardeners are really keen on encouraging beneficial insects and wildlife into their garden. We need them, especially the pollinators, the bees as well, to pollinate our fruit and our vegetables and to make sure the flowers grow really well. What is important is that we provide the right habitat, and if you've got trees and shrubs and perennials and grasses in your garden, that in itself provides not only a habitat for them to live in, but very often food as well. But we can help by doing other things like putting up bird boxes around the garden. We can feed them through the winter months. We can make sure they've got a clean source of water so they can drink and preen themselves in it. And also these bug hotels are really good, and I've got a couple dotted around the garden, and they've got all sorts that, you know, lots of nooks and crannies so that we can get solitary bees in there, lacewings, ladybirds will overwinter, we'll get butterflies in there, and all these little holes and nooks and crannies provide the perfect safe hideaway for them. So it's a good idea at this time of the year when lots of things are starting to hibernate just to check round, make sure everything's okay, and if you haven't got them, it's well worth buying one or two to put around the garden. Although the birds have long finished nesting for the season, very often they'll use nesting boxes for overwinter roosts, and wrens and blue tits and all sorts of birds will huddle in there when it's cold to generate warmth and be nice and cosy. So I thought we'd finish off with secateurs and how to sharpen them, and this has come about as a comment and a question from one of our viewers, Winifred, who said, could you show us how to get your secateurs sharp? And it's important if you've got secateurs that they are sharp, because it makes pruning so much easier. First thing I would say is always buy a good type of secateur. There are some really cheap, nasty ones on the market that are sharp when you buy them, but they lose their edge really quickly and are difficult to sharpen. So buy a good brand, and I like either Felco's, Bulldog do some lovely little snips, and Darlac make a really good range, and they use a good quality steel, which is the important thing. I've got all sorts. Over the years I've collected loads of secateurs. I've just got a few here. I use different ones for different jobs. These are my heavyweight ones that have got a swivel handle for when I'm doing lots and lots of pruning, and then I've got some really nice little dinky ones for intricate pruning and little snips. But they all need sharpening. They should be clean. This is another pair of mine, and they're nice and clean and sharp, and that is what we're looking for, because it's not just about the sharpness. We need them to be clean so we're not spreading diseases and viruses from plant to plant. So what do we need? A cloth, we need some meths, we need some oil, and we need a sharpening stone. And what we would normally do, these are a new pair, so that gives us an idea how sharp they should be. Look at those, it just goes through those stems like butter. So that's what we're going to try and recreate with a pair of my older ones here. So these, as you can see, are quite dirty. They've got dried on plant remains, and the reason the blades go black is because of the sap in the plants that we're pruning. So we need to get rid of all of that. So I always use an oil, something like a WD-40, give them all a spray. And then you need a very fine grade emery cloth or wet and dry, and that will really help to get rid of that black dried on sap. So that's important. The first thing we do is to clean up the blade on both sides, give it a good rub, and if we do this side as well, we can already see it's starting to loosen and rub off there. And we're going to do that one as well, the anvil side of it. Now I would do that until I can't see any black. We need to get right down, but obviously we haven't got half an hour, so we're going to cheat a little bit and just wipe that off now. But I think that gives an idea what we need to do to start with. So we need our oily rag there, and already that is starting to look better. But what we need to do is to make sure that this edge on the blade is really sharp. Now you can do it with a traditional sharpening stone, and what we need to do is to sweep the stone round on the bevel of that cutting edge. And if you've got a stone like this, it's quite easy to do, and we're following the bevel on that blade, and we can feel that cutting. If you haven't got one of these, then you can also buy these really good diamond sharpeners, and you can get, this one is coarse and that's a fine, and again we just follow that round until we've got a nice edge on there, and never run your finger along it, just check it that way, and then just to finish it off we just use the fine, and that I can see already has got a nice edge on it. Just take any burrs off the back, and that should now give us a really clean cut, and that is good. I can see that's a nice clean cut on there without having to use too much effort. So that's them sharpened. They would need cleaning up a bit more. And now the reason I've got the meths here is to clean them afterwards, because what happens is when you've been pruning in the garden, you'll finish up with lots of sap on there that will turn the blade black again. So just get some methylated spirits.
It's got a childproof lid on it, that one.
It has got a childproof lid on it, that one has. Put a bit onto some kitchen towel, and then when you finish with them, just give them a wipe over. That gets rid of the sap, but also any fungal diseases or any viruses that are on there, so that you're not going to get any cross-contamination when you're pruning. And finally, what you can do with them is you can just put a little bit of oil on there so that it keeps them nice and lubricated, and they'll work really well. So it's worth doing them now, because in October we've got lots of pruning to do around the garden, including roses. So if you've been one of the people that have asked about roses, we will be covering it over the next month. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you also to Winifred for reminding us about sharpening our secateurs, and thank you to Cobra Garden for sponsoring these videos. And if you've got any jobs that you'd like us to talk about or any comments, then please get in touch on social media, on our Facebook and Twitter page. And remember to tell all your friends about Pots and Trowels and get them to share it. We'll see you next time.